So, all right, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all again. So today I'll continue talking about conscience. So let's get to it. Slide where I stopped off. I thought this was a pretty good description of conscience. This is from the textbook Brian Cain, The Blessing of Life. So I thought I'd put it on the PowerPoint. And I think it's a good summary of what conscience is. He says, conscience may be defined as the awareness of moral truth. It is the ability to know what is right and from what is wrong. Our individual conscience binds us to a vision of truth, and it gives us the motivation to act correctly. It is a natural ability that both religious believers and non-believers recognize. All persons recognize an obligation to do good and to avoid evil. So I think that's a good summary. And it's covered some of the things that we've already discussed, that conscience is an awareness of what to do in accordance with the truth. Avoiding evil but doing good is the obligation of our conscience, of following our conscience. That is a motivation to act correctly, of choosing through the practical intellect of what to do that is right, what is correct, and not do what is wrong or evil. And it's a natural ability that if you have an intellect, it's part of human nature, then it's possessed by both believers and non-believers. It's not just a Christian thing or a religious person's thing. It's something that every person has and can follow in his or her mind. Okay, let me just make sure I got who came in. Ms. Reyes. Where'd you go, Ms. Reyes? There you are. And Ms. Weir. Ms. Weir's over there. Okay. I'll pass over this. What are the types of conscience? There are two major types, and then the second can be broken down into two more sets. But there are two types of conscience. There's generally psychological conscience, I say generally, but psychological conscience, and also what's called the general moral conscience. And then the moral conscience can be broken down into general and particular. My mistake. So the psychological and the moral conscience, and then the moral conscience can be broken down into general and particular. Okay? What are these things? The psychological conscience, well, psychology, the word psychology comes from the word psyche, or psyche in Greek, which just simply means the mind. Just the mind, the way we think and we feel. It's essentially focusing on our feelings and our sensory activities, the psychological conscience. Now let me see if I can give you a definition for the mind. The element or group of elements in the human person allowing for him or her to feel, to perceive, to think, to will, and to reason. So there's some overlap there with the soul as well. But the mind is, the main focus here would be on feelings and with perception as part of the mind. And the psychological conscience is essentially feelings of approval or disapproval that we might have, kind of a gut feeling whether to act on something or to not, kind of before the thinking process starts. Remember, conscience is generally an act of the intellect, the practical reason. But the psychological conscience is more of a gut feeling. It's non-rational in a lot of ways. And it's based on our sense experience, whether we like something or not, whether something causes pleasure or pain. Like my coffee, which gives me pleasure. It's activating my psychological conscience. And these are spontaneous reactions. They just happen. Their feelings just happen, or we could call them passions. You see there's a definition there for passions, which I'll get to in a second. But they're spontaneous reactions, which might be healthy reactions or might not be. Okay, anyone who deals with psychology can tell you, those of you who are studying social work and will take some psychological classes and counseling classes will know that the human brain, the mind, can elicit spontaneous reactions. Which, where do they come from? Well, they can come from genetics, they can come from our genetic makeup, they can come from our nurturing makeup, the environment we've been raised in. And so, they may be, they're non-rational and spontaneous, so they may be healthy and helpful to the person, but they also may not be. And that's what part of counseling is about, just to kind of tease out and distinguish what are helpful reactions and what are not. Passion is simply a philosophical word that's used for feelings, basically. So a passion is a philosophical term for a feeling or emotion. For the most part, I'm simplifying, but that's basically what you're getting with a passion. Passio in Latin means to feel, okay, to feel something, a feeling. And passions and feelings are neither good nor evil. They're really ambivalent. They might be helpful. They might have some evolutionary benefit, like to fear might cause us to flee from something that's harmful or pull away from something that's not pleasurable. But generally, passions they're in and of themselves, they are ambivalent. And because people simply feel things, there may be a purpose to the feeling, but you simply feel things. There's spontaneous reactions. A feeling can only become morally qualified, meaning that it has some moral value, some value for good or evil, or good or bad, to the extent that a feeling engages your reason and your will. The reason and the will give a purpose to the feeling. Okay, so just to give you an example, a person may be uncomfortable around certain types of people, and that's just a feeling. You may be socially awkward. Okay, it's just social awkwardness. It's part of your psychological conscience. It's a feeling. But if you engage the reason and will to where you kind of activate that feeling to mean that you have bias around certain types of people because you feel uncomfortable with them, or you start to not like them, or start to have stereotypical views of them, that we would call bigotry. You've now engaged this spontaneous passion, this feeling, which doesn't really have moral value. It's just a discomfort. Okay, it can be there. It might have nothing to do with bigotry at all. It might just, as I say, be socially awkward. There might be psychological reasons in your brain, just the way the makeup of your brain is, that you're not good in groups. But once you start to invoke your reason and your will and that qualifies your discomfort towards this certain group of people that I'm around, I don't like them, or I don't like being around them, then we would call that maybe bigotry, something that's not good. You've now morally qualified the feeling. Turn the page. What is the most fundamental passion? Well, if we look at, for example, where did I put my thing? There we are. If we look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 1765, CCC, number 1765, it qualifies, or it identifies, the most basic or the most fundamental passion is love. A feeling of care, concern. Did I give you a definition for love? Actually, no, I didn't do that. Okay. I think I've given you a definition for love already. But anyways, I'll tell you again. It's, care for someone, concern for someone, affection. That is the most fundamental passion. It wills the good of the other. That's what love is doing. It's willing. Remember what the good is. It's a benefit. It's a perfection of our human nature. It's willing the good of another. You want the other person to benefit, want their nature, what they are as a human person, to become better. And love moves that person towards the good, which is his or her ultimate and complete benefit, hopefully producing that good forever. Right? In the case of healthcare, you're moving the person towards health and wholeness. That's what you're looking for. It's in a sense an act of love. We could call it compassion or just care, but love is care. Okay, that's an aspect of it. When we get to the moral conscience, actually, I put this on. I thought this was a good quotation, so I put this on the PowerPoint. This is from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 1787, where it just states what I already told you about the passions are neither good nor evil, and they become qualified to the extent that they effectively engage the reason and will. Okay, so it's just basically what I said to you about that. They are voluntary. They are voluntary, either because they are commanded by the will or because the will does not place obstacles in their way. So we can choose the passions in some cases where we can choose to be angry, or just to take one passion, one feeling of anger, to the extent that we choose it. We engage our will for it. Or we don't place an obstacle in the way. We allow the anger to flow from us. We don't stop being angry, which would be forgiveness or something like that, if we put an obstacle. I'll get to this in a moment. Let me just write this. I'll get to these definitions in one moment, but I wanted to talk about the general moral conscience. When we get to the moral conscience, which is where you're actually applying the feelings that you might have, the passions that you might have about something, but in a rational way. You're choosing to act in a rational, moral way. The general moral conscience would be the presence of basic principles for judgment making, that I can make judgments about what to do. That's basically what's going on in the general moral conscience. Moral means to be able to act, to do something. Okay, hopefully good, but you can also do evil. But what qualifies something as a moral act is that the agent does something, chooses to do something. So I am a moral being. I can make choices to do actions. And there need to be some principles behind that, of some sort. Okay, even you don't have to be a religious person to have principles. We've talked about the Bible or whatever, but you don't have to be a religious person to have some sort of philosophical principles that you live your life by. That would be the general moral conscience. You have a perception that there are principles of morality, even if they're simply selfish principles, like self-interest. You act out of self-interest. You do things to other people so they won't do them to you. They will treat you in the same way. And principles are necessary. I think I've mentioned that before. One could say that if an artist doesn't have a bucket of paint, he or she can't paint. Okay, that would be a metaphor for the principles. If you don't have principles, what do? You don't do. You don't know what to do. You don't know what to act, or how to act, I should say. And you can be frozen without principles. So you're locked in because you don't know what to do. Principles are necessary. How those principles are applied is where we get to the particular. We go from the general to the specific. We go from the general to the particular. We go to the actual situation. And this is where the rubber hits the road. And this is where we get divisions between what are the particular types of conscience that you can have. And philosophers and moralists have come up with different types of conscience. I'm just going to go through some of them, and I want to highlight the most important ones. There are two that are problematic consciences, the first one being dubious and then the other one being lax. And they're different in different ways, which is kind of a tautology, but they're different in the way that they are problematic. A dubious conscience means simply that the course of action is unclear. You know there's a conflict, or you know there's something that you need to do, that there's an action that needs to be taken in a certain circumstance, but you're undecided, you're doubtful, you're dubious, which is exactly what dubious means in Latin. Dubious meaning, with my glasses on, meaning moving in two directions. You're wavering. You're doubtful. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. You take your eyeglasses off, you can't see. In the case of a doubtful conscience, the best course of action is to not act on it till there's clarification. You need more information. And this stands to reason, I think. There are situations where a decision has to be made, but you can't really come to a decision because maybe the facts are of equal weight on either side. Or maybe sometimes there are three sides to an issue and not just two sides. And you're not sure what to do. And so you kind of instinctively know that you can't act, because if I do X, well, then there's Y, and that might cause trouble. Or if I do Y, there's X, and there are equally good reasons to do X. And so on a dubious conscience, the best course of action is to not act, which can be hard to do because sometimes you need to act. You're forced into action just by the situation or the circumstances. But in general, the general rule of thumb is to not act on a doubtful conscience until there's clarification. A lax conscience is different. A lax conscience is something that's not doubtful about what it should do, but it can become, well, I guess you could say it is a form of doubt in a way. It can become doubtful from prideful actions or the habitual practice of what someone knows to be the wrong thing. And so you have the Latin word laxus, which means loose, okay, or wide or spacious. And something that is lax is not tight. Okay, it's not tightly bound. So a lax conscience kind of allows itself to do what it wants, even if it knows that the action is evil or not good to do. That's the primary thing to highlight there, that the person knows in his or her conscience that they shouldn't do something, he or she shouldn't do something, but still chooses to do it. And if the person chooses to do it habitually, they can develop what's called a lax conscience, where they start not to know what is the best thing to do or what is the good that they're going towards. And all things can affect this. Okay, think of a person who tells lies all the time. They develop this habit of telling lies. They cannot, at a certain point, they've developed, even though they know they shouldn't tell lies, they're not supposed, let's put it this way, they're not supposed to tell lies, but they do. And maybe you've known people like this, that you can never get the truth out of them. The first instinct of the person is always to kind of fudge the truth a little bit or to color the truth. It's become a habit. They've developed what we would call a lax conscience. They've constantly chosen, I shouldn't say constantly, but consistently chosen to do something that they know they're probably not supposed to do, which is telling a lie, telling an untruth, telling what they know is not the truth, is not reality. And then it becomes a habit to the point where they can't control it in a way. It becomes that way for them. They've darkened their intellect to the point where it's the natural inclination of the intellect to choose that non-beneficial action. And it's non-beneficial because then you can't trust the person. You can't trust what the person says. I'll pass over that quotation. Here are two better forms of conscience. I talked about two forms of conscience that are problematic. But this is what we're aiming for in conscientious choice, when we're making a conscientious choice to do something. A certain conscience and a true conscience, which are not always the same thing, although they're very similar. What you want to arrive at is a certain knowledge of what to do. And that's, we see from our definition. You identify clearly with certitude, certainness, you could say, that something is clearly good or bad to do. And in that case, you know you need to follow your conscience. You're obligated to follow it. Even if the conscience is wrong, you must always act according to a certain conscience, even if it's faulty or mistaken. And that's where the distinction becomes in between a certain conscience and a true conscience. A true conscience, I would say, is a certain conscience that has decided correctly about what is the good to be done and the evil to be avoided. A certain conscience may not be true. You may be mistaken. Okay? I consider, for example, a culture that you live in where, as I told you, to marry more than one person, a polygynous relationship or polygynous relationship is common and understood and accepted. Right? They don't understand that marriage, at least according to, from a Christian perspective, is the objective good of marriage is between one person and one person. But they don't understand that. God bless you. In their historical situation, their cultural situation, even now the situation of their conscience, this is normal. And this is something that's a good to be done. Marriage is a good in and of itself, but to have more than one wife, or in some cases more than one husband, this is a good that should be practiced. And so the person might have a certain conscience that, yeah, I'm going to get married again. I have a wife, but I'm going to marry another wife, maybe another wife, and who knows? We'll see how far it goes. You know, how much can I afford? You know, they're acting according to their certain conscience, which is not necessarily a true conscience. It's from the Christian perspective, it will be a mistaken conscience, but a certain conscience nonetheless. All right, that doesn't make what's objectively false or erroneous or bad good. What it does do is it affects the level of responsibility. Okay, the person may have no responsibility because they're following a certain conscience that, yes, is mistaken, but they believe that they should follow it. What you want to aim for is the true conscience, which is certain about something, but it's certain about the correct thing to do. Okay, and that's not, that's hard. Okay, yes, conscience always gets me too, Miss Springard. And that's hard because sometimes, maybe a lot of times you have to work just with a certain conscience, which, yeah, you have to have that humility to understand that, I might be mistaken in this case, but this is my last best judgment about what I believe I'm supposed to be doing in this situation. And hopefully it's right. Sometimes you have a true conscience, boom, this is definitely the right thing to do. I know it's good. All the evidence that I've looked at, my own reason tells me it's good. It's rational. My will wants to choose it because it's good. All the authorities that I've consulted, maybe the church or other maybe wise people I've talked to, tell me it's good. And so I have a reasonable assurance that I have a true conscience. That's what you want to aim for. But a certain conscience is certainly acceptable. Did I put erroneous conscience on there? An erroneous conscience. Well, don't worry about an erroneous conscience. I'll pass over on that. That's just a different type of conscience. I want to focus on the problematic and the problematic ones and the beneficial ones. How do you develop your conscience? How do you develop your conscience? Okay? The formation of conscience, or could also say our consciousness of good and bad. Well, the three basic ones are, first of all, truth, that we are conforming our actions with the way the world really is. At least we hope it is. As best we can. Okay, we're creatures living in a physical world. There are barriers to what we can know. Our brains are only so large. They only have so much capacity. We have to rely on our five senses for navigating the world, and we might not see things as they truly are, and the person might have mental illness or disability. There are all sorts of things, but the best, truth is still the standard, that we're trying to conform ourselves to reality as best we can. Then there's this thing called the natural law, which I'll talk about later or in another class, which is pretty much more. It's the way the universe works morally, the way, to simplify it, the way in our act, how we're supposed to act in the world, how the world, in our moral sense, our way of acting responsibly, the world is governed. It's governed by certain, you can call them laws, but ways of acting that should always be followed by all people, that can be known through human reason. It's part of our human nature and what makes us human and makes us fully human. And then you have what's called positive law, positive versus negative. Okay, if I take something away, that's negative. Or I tell you not to do something, you shall not kill. That's negative law in a way. But a positive law is telling you to do things. And positive laws can come from all sorts of sources. Our most obvious source is from the state, from the government. The government gives all sorts of laws. You drive around campus here. Well, it's not really the government, but I guess you could say the government of Gwynedd Mercy University. But you drive around the campus here, and there are stop signs from place to place. Okay, and you're supposed to stop at them. Gwynedd Mercy tells me to stop at certain places. Okay, so I obey it. It's a positive law. It's a rule. When I go out on the street, there are street signs that are telling me all sorts of things that I'm legally supposed to do. Speed limits, yield signs, stuff like that. Those are positive laws. And there can be other positive laws like don't kill someone. The state can say don't kill someone. If you do kill someone, then we will punish you in a certain way. The church has positive laws. Just yesterday was the Feast of All Saints' Day, which was a holy day of obligation for Catholics. So the church has a law that on those days, it's kind of like a Sunday, Catholics were supposed to go at least to Mass, at least to go to the Holy Eucharist to celebrate that day. It's just a law, okay? It's not from God in the sense that it's come down from the mountain, like Moses with the Ten Commandments, but it's a church-made law for a certain good purpose, to remind Catholics of certain moral goods, like that the saints, the holy people, and that we're all called to be holy people. We're all called to be good and moral people. There's a purpose behind that law. There's a lesson that they're trying to teach. It's a positive law. It comes from the church. There might be positive laws that God gives. I mentioned the Ten Commandments. Those would be positive laws. God tells people to not work on the seventh day of the week, to rest. That would be a positive law. Okay? For those who are Christians, there are extra sources that you consult for your conscience, for conscientious formation. The first of those would be talking to God, conversation with God, prayer, trying to get some direction, some spiritual direction, not just, obviously you're called to use your reason. It's part of the intellect, but talking to God about what to do. It might not, especially if there's confusion or conflict, to give some sense, maybe some feeling, some passion, some kind of advice or direction to one's purpose of action. There's also, for a Christian and those who have been baptized, the presence of God, the Holy Spirit in the soul, who guides and leads. The belief is that the Holy Spirit guides and leads, is God's force or power in our souls that can guide or lead people towards truth, kind of directing people towards truth, kind of like a flower or a plant is directed towards the sun, just naturally. It's part of the nature of a plant or a tree to be directed towards the sun. It's called heliotropism. And our natural direction is towards God and towards the good for our human nature. Even if you don't believe in God, even if you're an atheist, you're still directed towards the good, the benefit of your human nature, the fulfillment of who you are. Okay? That's why you go to a hospital, because you want health. You know that sickness is not a good thing. You want the wholeness that health brings. And so you go to a place where you believe people will bring you to that. So there's the presence, this direction that the Holy Spirit can give. You can also look in the Bible, but remember the Bible is, especially with a lot of modern issues, is not going to deal with them, obviously, since it was written thousands of years ago, but it's going to give general principles or general ideas about where you should be directed and what your kind of disposition should be. All right, so sacred scripture or the Bible is a resource that one can use. Again, I would not recommend it for, you're not going to find something about genetic, stem cell research, but you will find some principles about, what God is, the nature of God and the nature of the human person and the dignity of the human person, and where God is leading or directing human life and how he wants it to be. And then finally, there's the magisterium, which we've talked about more than enough, so I don't need to talk any more about it, but that's the teaching authority of the church, which does have experts who can apply the resources not only through their own prayer and their own direction by the Holy Spirit, but their own reading of Scripture, and can advise Christians in how to form their consciences on specific issues that come up. It's one of the benefits of having the magisterium, a living magisterium, that it can make determinations on issues that come up now in the present day that were not maybe concerns 50 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Okay. This is a quotation from our reading. Hopefully you did it, from the Canadian Catholic Conference, the Statement on the Formation of Conscience. I think it's a good statement. I think that it's not too long, and it's clear, which I think is always a benefit when something's not vague to read. It's clear about what conscience is, and it's comprehensive as well. I think that it deals with a lot of issues that are surrounding conscience and whatever. But the point I wanted to highlight, and a lot of the things that I'm saying to you can be found in this statement. Well, maybe not all the things that I tell you, but a lot. The general point is there in the statement, and it addresses issues like what if there's a conflict of conscience, and there's a how do you resolve that, which I don't get into in detail here. But if there is the first of all, which I might get into in a second after reading this. This is from Numbers 38 and 39 of that statement from the reading. The responsible person must weigh the facts before acting. Okay, so that's the baseline. You're a responsible person. You have freedom, which implies responsibility for the actions that you choose to do. And so you're responsible first and foremost for weighing the facts of your actions before you act. But that's far removed from saying that he may act, or he or she, I would say, the acting person, may act in accordance with whims or wishes. In other words, it's a fancy way of saying, you can't just do what you want to do, which we kind of know. Because there are all sorts of things telling us that we can't do what we want to do. The very fact that, we come into this room, we sit in a chair, people don't sit on the floor, they don't sit on the desks, they don't just wander around, or make noise. You kind of know that there's a standard of conduct. We can't just do what we want to do. We don't act on our whims and wishes. Some of these are simply cultural values, they're conventional, they're determined by, well, this is just how you're supposed to act, But the same thing kind of applies with our consciences, that, no one can tell me what to do. Well, we know that's not kind of true, because most of our life is being told what we can't do or what we're supposed to do. You can't walk out the door of your house without being told what to do or what not to do. We accept that. We accept that to a certain point, because it gives us freedom. It allows us to live our life. Mentioned before that there are all sorts of rules and laws that we follow, standards that are set in the world, but they allow us to live and to flourish. A person tells you don't walk into the street when there's traffic. Well, yeah, they're telling you what not to do. Well, no one tells me what to do, Well, come on, you kind of obvious. That's kind of obvious, And when now you could say, well, I'm an adult and I can look at the traffic and I can use my reason to verify and say, well, yes, what this person's telling me is reasonable. Now I will choose, and as an autonomous choosing subject, to do what they tell me to do, but not because they tell me to do it, because I verified it and I'm making my own choice. Yes, okay, fine. But do that with a 2-year-old. Ain't happening. With the 2-year-old, just say, don't go into traffic. No, you stay right here. You yell at the kid, or maybe you don't yell at the kid, but you look out for the person. Your parents tell you what to do. They don't allow you to follow your whims and wishes. At a certain point, you should be able to make your own decisions about what to do, but sometimes you need help still, even as an adult. A believer has the absolute obligation of conforming his conduct first and foremost to what the church teaches. That's a rather extreme statement, but basically what they're trying to say is that the church is a voice, not just one. If you're a Catholic, if you're not a Catholic, then this doesn't apply. But if a person is a believer or says they're a Christian, or in this case a Catholic Christian, there is expected that there's some sort of obligation to at least a minimum consult what the church teaches on a subject, if you can find out if the church does have a teaching. Why? Because there's a spiritual principle involved here, that first and foremost there's the belief that Christ, that Jesus, through his Holy Spirit, through the power of God, God the Holy Spirit, is present in the church, and hopefully, one hopes, guiding the church towards truth, not towards error, guiding the church towards teaching people how to live a full human life, not a bad human life. This is particularly the case with those who exercise services within the church. These would be the bishops, the successors to the apostles, and for the church, and first of which service is that of the apostle, which I already mentioned. Okay? So there is a sincere effort of investigating one's own influences, prejudices, biases that I might have, which might blind me in making an act of conscience, a correct act of conscience. And discerning my conscience is a kind of a dialogue with the church. Ultimately, I have to make the decision, but I should be in dialogue with Scripture and tradition, with the Word of God in the Bible, but also God's revelation, you could say, or God's intentions that are passed down to us through tradition and through the teaching activity of the church. Drawing light from authority or drawing light from the faith doesn't necessarily entail a blind acceptance of authority. If you read if you read the statement from the Canadian bishops, they talk about this. They talk about there is what's called a static conscience. There is what's called a revolutionary conscience. And they talk about what's in the middle, which is what they prefer as a dynamic conscience. And the static conscience is like static cling on your clothes. You know, when you get lint stuck to your clothes, it doesn't move. Okay, you know, it doesn't move. It's static, so it's stasis. It stays where it is. And this is kind of how they describe a person with a static conscience simply wants to be told what to do. They don't want to do the work themselves. You know, just let the church tell me what to do and I'll do it, like a robot. Okay? But God didn't create robots. He created dynamic beings with their own powers and faculties, which is a fancy word for an intellectual power or power of our souls. Excuse me. On the opposite end of the spectrum is the revolutionary conscience. This is the conscience that says, no one's going to tell me what to do. I'll make all the decisions for myself without any reference to any other authority than myself. No one's going to tell me what to do. It's a revolt. It's a revolt. And it's hard to live that way. It's hard to live that way because, when you're living in a social world, obviously you're going to run into people who are going to tell you what to do. Your boss is going to tell you what to do. Okay, I mentioned your parents. Okay, and you can have a revolutionary conscience or a revolutionary demeanor and simply say, well, I'm going to do what I want to do, but that's not going to work out very well, at least not in the social world. The ideal conscience is a dynamic one from the Greek word dunamis, which means power. Okay, a powerful conscience that has the force of it. You know, it has its own force, it has its own dignity and respect, where it doesn't need to be simply told what to do like a robot. It knows what to do. It knows. I know I need to think through a moral issue on my own. But I also know it's not revolutionary in the sense that I can't do it alone, that I am part of a social group. There are people who can give me advice and direction. That doesn't mean they're binding my freedom, you know. Some people do try to do that. You have to do this or you go to hell, you know. Well, it may be true that you might go to hell if you take a gun and you shoot up a building, full of people. That might be an action that's hell-worthy, and telling a person that they might go to hell might actually stop them from doing that if they're a believer. That might be good advice to give them, like that guy up in Maine who shot all those people for whatever reason. I still don't know. I don't think they still found the guy. But anyways. So I know that, but I have a dynamic conscience which then leads me to make a decision. I'll pass on with that. How do we make decisions? There's basically a 3-step process. What are we going? And maybe you'll think this is obvious, but I'll go through it anyways. I'm the master of the obvious, I guess. When we talk about conscience and decision making, The process of moral action is made up of several components. It is a process of decision making. Sometimes you know immediately this is just the right thing to do, and that's good. And if you have a true conscience, then that's something that easily, it's a habit. Again, it's a habit. You have to create this habit of making true and right judgments. But then, you can make a true judgment, and you can easily distinguish what is the good thing to do. Sometimes that's easy, but sometimes it's not. Maybe a lot of times it's not. It's an integrated process, and this process is divided into deliberation, judgment, and choice. Deliberation, judgment, and choice. What does deliberation mean? Deliberation. Get your definition here. The act of thinking about or discussing something carefully before making a decision. Okay, it's kind of obvious. Okay, you think about or discuss something carefully before making a decision. Delibero. And, the root of this word, delibero in Latin, is liber, which is free, freedom. Deliberation should be freeing to us. It's not constricting us or binding us or enslaving us. It's supposed to free our intellect so we can know what to do. And to do things is part of freedom. It's liberating to be able to do things. A slave can't do things. He or she is bound in chains. That's what slavery, kind of image of slavery that we have. But deliberation is freedom. We're not bound. We weigh in one's mind, delibero, according to the Latin, weigh in one's mind, but also in the broader sense of taking counsel or considering maturely. From the Latin verb libro, to balance, to make even. We're balancing the arguments in our head. Okay, we're taking all the arguments and balancing them and seeing which has the richest meaning, the richest, what's the word I'm looking for? Force, I should say. So you deliberate, you think about what to do, or you talk about what to do. The person in deliberation, you're using your intellect, your reason to search for means that are suitable for attaining the intended end. And this kind of ties into something I'll talk about later called virtue ethics and the practice of virtues. The virtue of prudence will come into play here, what we call prudence or foresight. Okay, that you are in prudence, you are looking for suitable means that for attaining the end, which is your good. So you take into account the suitability of certain means for reaching an end, your purpose, and you take them into account on their own merits, whether these are good or bad means for reaching my end. Better, you could have good means, but a better means, you want to choose the better one. But also you are deliberating about the different relationships of specific acts to the end or the goal. As I said, the relationship would be good or better. You might have a means that's good, but you might have a means that's better to do something, to get at what you want. You also consider whether the various means or the things that you're going to do are morally good actions. Is this a good thing to do? Should I do this? Which is another way of raising that question. And you want to ask how the circumstances will affect the action, okay? There might be a good thing you can do, but the circumstances do not fit what you should do, okay? It might be a good thing to tell a person that she got butchered on her haircut. So, I don't know, maybe it was the hairdresser's bad day, he or she was angry, I don't know, the razor slipped, but it's just the haircut doesn't seem to, it's objectively a bad haircut. Let's say it's not even a matter of taste. It's like an objectively bad haircut. They dumped a whole bunch of bleach in the person's hair. They're going to dye the hair a certain color, and they dumped a whole bunch of bleach, and it's all messed up. Okay? All right. It might be a good thing to tell the person that, hey, do you know that you got a bad haircut? Maybe, well, maybe it's not a good thing to tell, but it's good in the sense that you're telling the truth, especially if they ask you, Well, what do you think about my haircut? And it's a good to tell the truth. It's a good to tell what is reality, which seems to be to you that, no, something wrong happened with that haircut. Did they screw it up? Maybe the person might say, yeah, they screwed it up. They put in the wrong. I just wanted to ask, does it look right to you? Sometimes, okay. Or if they ask you, is this a nice dress to wear? Or do you think I look good in this clothing? And sometimes maybe this is a better example than a haircut, because the person might really be asking for what you think the reality is. And it's a good to tell them what the reality is. Say, no, I don't think that really fits well on you. I don't think the color goes well with you. And the person might say, yeah, you're right. I was thinking the same thing, but I just wanted a second opinion. Okay? So, however, the circumstances might change whether you want to invoke that good or not, because it might be where if you tell them the truth and you get the sense that if I tell him or her the truth, it would hurt his or her feelings, And so you have to be sensitive to the circumstances. You have to understand how the circumstances might affect the action, even a good action. Deliberation might propose several options for action. When you're deliberating, you might come up with several different things you can do, but just given the nature and the state of the world that we live in, we're physical, material beings. We can only really do and choose one thing at a time. Sometimes you can kill two birds with one stone, but I don't know if you can kill three birds with one stone. A lot of times you only have one action that can be done. And so this leads to the second part, which is judgment. The process of forming an authoritative opinion. Judgment is decision. This is decision making. It's a decision about what means, okay, what thing you want to do, what will be acted upon. What will you choose to do? And it's an intellectual decision. You have to make a rational decision under the circumstances you're existing in, whatever they may be, that a certain means is the best means out of all the means that you could possibly choose. So it's a practical judgment. You're doing something, so it's practical. It's action. It's a judgment of the intellect. And when you make that judgment, you have to adhere to that judgment. This is where the will comes in. There is a volitional response corresponding to it. Volition simply means the will, to will something, volition. So there's a volitional response. You make a choice. Okay? You think, you decide, you choose. But when you choose, the will commits you to that judgment. And that conjoined activity which commits you is called choice. It's kind of like when the intellect and the will come into play, come together in union, we call it choice. And that choice commits you. What has been judged and chosen is then executed. Whoops. And I didn't put choice on I didn't put the definition for choice because I already gave you the definition for choice in a previous PowerPoint. So remember, choice is the ability to make a decision about what to do. And this is important because choice, again, this word commitment, it forms you. It makes you who you are. If you commit yourself too much to evil actions, your choices are evil, it can form the kind of person you are. It doesn't change your human nature. It doesn't mean like all of a sudden, the cells in your body become evil because you choose to commit murder all the time. But people can think that and act like that, like they can say, I've got blood on my hands, or they're stained with evil or something like that. We can think in that kind of way. It's kind of a superstitious way of looking at it or whatever. But no, your human nature doesn't change because of it. But the inside of you can change. It can change, one might say, your soul or what kind of person you choose to be. Okay, so that's conscience. Let's move on to our next topic, which will be natural law. Whoops. Nope. Hold on. Not working. I mean, it's working, but it's not working as it's supposed to work. There we go. It's not filling up the screen. All right, the natural moral law. Let's talk about that. Where are we? And how it relates to bioethics and moral decision-making itself. According to Margaret Hogan, who I've mentioned before, professor of ethics at the University of Portland, natural law theory makes the following fundamental claims. Two fundamental claims, actually. That there is a natural order or rule in the universe. That's the first claim. And that this natural order is accessible to human reason. And I think that's somewhat obvious, okay? Even though you might have some physicists or astrophysicists who might say, well, there's really no order, it's all chaotic, or there's no, things happen by chance and there's really no order there. Well, order comes from somewhere, even if it comes from us. And last I checked, we were part of the universe. The human animal is part of the cosmos. We're made up of stardust. The same elements that make up the stars that we see in our telescopes are the same elements that are in us. So we're not. We can still have this kind of what we call human not primalism, but this kind of, I guess you say, human chauvinism, like we're still the center of the universe and we're looking out at the universe rather than the universe is in us and we're in the universe. So, I mean, if there's no order in the universe and we create the order, isn't there some order? There must be something that we're seeing. There's some ability to create order in the universe in us. Where does that come from if there's not order to begin with? Okay, how can you study if you're an astrophysicist and you want to say that it's all chaotic? There's something, even in the chaos, there seems to be some order. Otherwise, you couldn't study galaxies from far away because everything would be different. Things would be not acting in the same way as they act here, even in our own solar system. We would expecting to see chaotic elements. So that kind of ends the intellectual enterprise, because it would be very difficult to impose order on the chaos. We might try, but then we'd just be fooling ourselves. And people have tried. A lot of times when you read the ancient mythology, even in the Bible, when you read ancient mythology about what the universe is and where the universe came from and how the solar system works, these were stories. People were trying to impose order on something that they didn't understand the order for. And so, of course, they got it wrong. But now we understand it better because we're actually respecting the order that is there. The earth goes around the sun. It goes around the sun in a particular way. And that, there's not chaos there. And it's not an order we created. Whether the order came out of natural processes is another question. But it's there and we can observe it. The same applies in the moral realm. There are actions we can observe have bad effects, and they seem to have bad effects always and everywhere and for all people. They're laws in a sense. And what is a law? A law is a rule of behavior enacted by a competent authority for the common good of people. Okay? So it's something telling us what to do. A law tells us what to do. But the person telling us what to do is a competent authority, someone we assume is rational and reasonable, and has our best interest at heart. So that's for the common good of people. And we accept laws. Laws are protective. Okay, you can't steal from somebody. There's law against that. And a person might not steal simply because there's a law. Obviously, there are better reasons to not steal, but sometimes you need a law in order to protect people from that. If a person gets caught from stealing, they go to court, and the courts can issue restitution. They can give you back what was stolen from you, hopefully. Hopefully resolve it that way. So laws are protective. They do have a benefit. They should have a benefit. Good laws. There can be bad laws as well. That's another issue. But recall that law is for the common good. And remember what the common good is. It's the quote, from the definition, it's the totality of social conditions that allow people to reach their own fulfillment. That's what a good law should be going towards, reaching fulfillment. It shouldn't be something oppressive or something that makes you less human. It should make you more human and able to do things. Competent authority means a qualified authority. The person has the authority and power to do so. People get annoyed by, well, the church can't tell me, who are they to tell me what? Well, they're competent authorities. They're just of a different kind. We accept competent authorities in our life all the time. We accept the police. The police are competent authorities. We accept legislators at the state legislature in Harrisburg, yes, and we accept legislators in the federal level. All these people, you elected them. Some of them have you elected. Maybe some of them you haven't, because in the Congress, the U.S. Congress, you've got people from all different states. So you have to rely on people from Hawaii, from Alaska, the far reaches of the country, who are going to make decisions on the federal level about how you're going to live your life. They're going to make laws for you, but you accept them as competent authorities. It's no different in the religious realm. There are people who are competent authorities in the religious realm. And the fact that they're religious doesn't necessarily make them, it's not like it's a different kind of category that somehow, okay, I'll listen to the police. You got to do what they tell you. I'll listen to my state representative or my senator, my congressman, but the hell with the bishop. The bishop's just a man, Yeah, most of the laws we live by are made by men. Maybe all the laws we live by are made by men. Men and women, I should say. But they're competent. We accept them as having that authority. Law, already by definition, law has a moral quality, an ethical quality. Why? Because it's for the benefit of persons. It's for their good. It's telling them to do things or not do things that are for their good. So there's already embedded within law an ethical quality. And this applies to bioethics because you don't necessarily, there are laws related to the medical profession, of course, but most of the times you're going to have to follow standards of ethics, or standards or policies, and there's already an ethical quality there because the policies of the hospital are there to benefit you, to benefit the patient. Okay, so already there's an ethical quality there as well. Did I put that on there or did I not? No. I did. Okay. All right, but I don't need to go, because I basically, just to give you the source of where this is coming from, but this is a good summary, is also from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1951, where it talks about what a law is a law, and I basically pretty much based my definition on that. It's a very traditional understanding of law, but I think it's a good one. The point I would want to make from this section is that all law finds its first and ultimate truth in the eternal law, which comes from God. A law is tending towards, pushing towards truth, the way things really are, or the way things really should be in a society. There should be a society where there's no theft. You shouldn't need a law for that. You shouldn't need a law for against killing the innocent, or rape, or evil things that people do. You shouldn't need laws against that if people acted the way they should act. But, all you got to do is go down to Philly. And that's the best argument I can find for original sin. If you ever want to see original sin on display, go to Times Square in New York City. Well, maybe in the old days when it was all pornography shops and XXX theaters and stuff like that, but they cleaned it out in the 90s. And now it's all Disney stuff, but whatever. You shouldn't need laws, but we do have laws, and the laws are trying to tell us how reality should be. Don't steal, no theft, no murder, no sexual violence, none of these things. And law is declared and established by reason, by our reason, as a participation in the providence of the living God, meaning that laws help us kind of participate in some way, give us a share in governing the universe we live in. Governing the universe we live in. Just like God governs the universe that we live in. So we are kind of in some way, we are acting like gods in a way. We're given that freedom to govern how we will act, how we will be in our society. Law supposes, and I'll move on to this point in a second about the types of law that we have, but just one final point. Law supposes three things, and I'll write them on the board: reasonableness, truth, and direction. Law supposes that it's rational, it's reasonable, it should make sense. There you go. One, that it's rational. Second, that it's true. And three, that it's directed. I'll say directed. So it should be rational, it should be true. The law should represent reality as it really is. Is adultery a good or bad thing? The natural moral law would say adultery is not. Taking another man's wife or taking another woman's husband for sexual purposes is in some sense a violation of not just reason, but it's also of reality. This person is not your wife, not your husband, and therefore does not have sexual activity due to them. It's not what they deserve. It should be true. It should represent reality as it really is. But if the natural law were wrong about that, adultery is perfectly fine, well, then it wouldn't be true. But a basis for natural law is that it's true, or any law. And also the basis for any law is that it's directed. It's directive towards to the human person's final end, which is union with God, ultimately. So it should be directed towards a human's final end and should not get in the way of that end, that final end of direction towards God. Or you could also say just direction towards human benefit and flourishing. No smile. Okay. I'm right there with you. Several types of law. There are four types that we can identify. One of them is the natural law, as you can see. But there's eternal law, natural law, divine law, or God's law, and positive law. What are these? Eternal law and natural law are the most related, okay, because natural law kind of comes out of eternal law. But eternal law, I have a definition here for you, is the name for the order that God has placed upon the cosmos, upon the universe, and all the things that are in it. It is essentially the plan of divine wisdom and order, directing all the movements of the cosmos. The way God wanted the world to work. Maybe the only way it could work. Okay? What is order? In case you're wondering, it's the state or quality of being placed in a correct or suitable sequence or relationship. All right, that's order. Okay, we see order, I would say, even in the quantum level, just from the way that you have the neutrons and the protons and the electrons all, and other things, leptons, deuterons, all nuons, muons, all sorts of things that were bosons that we've discovered, all relating to each other. Now, they might have to come into relationship to each other in order to relate and act the way they act. And maybe when they're not related to each other, they act differently. But nevertheless, an order is created when they're placed in a suitable relationship. And, that's visible, that's observable. That's what the hard sciences are doing. That's what's, we're looking at, sociology, looking at human societies, or anthropology, looking at human beings act. Physics, chemistry, looking at the elements. You're looking at different things, and seeing what order they have when they're placed into relationship. What happens when certain things come into relationship or their relationship? This is the belief is that this comes ultimately from a source, that it's not an eternal order that just simply exists, because the question is, where does it come from? If you want to say that order is God, if that's the ultimate source of order, is simply order itself, you could say that's another word for God, but we'll use the word God. The divine law. Oh wait, whoops. Did I put this out of order? I think I wanted to go with natural reason or natural law after this. Okay, I'll say this anyways from my notes. Excuse me, I'm just talking to myself. According to our friend Thomas Aquinas, who again was a medieval thinker, lived back in the 1200s, and I think I've told you already about his book that he wrote, the Summa Theologiae. He describes the eternal law as the type of divine wisdom directing all movements, actions, and movements. Type in the sense of a figure, it's an exemplar, it's a pattern. It's a pattern of divine wisdom directing all actions and movements, giving order. And the eternal law is basically the general principles by which God intends or wills the cosmos to be an act. Because it's an act of, it's an act of God's will. It's an act of God's will. He wants it to be this way, but he also thinks it to be this way. It's an act of divine intelligence or God's wisdom. So again, God has intellect and will as well. That's how we're in the image and likeness of God, that we possess these things, and God does too. And because the cosmos or the universe is created with God's intellect, it is rationally ordered and can be rationally understood. This is the basis for us being able to even understand what's going on and what we should do in this universe. Because God wills this universe out of his own goodness, God did not have to do anything. If there's a God who exists in and of himself, he doesn't have to do anything. He's completely free, exists in complete freedom, and did not have to create anything, make anything material. It's not... God is not constricted. He's not, what's the word I'm looking for? Determined in that way. Like God had to create a universe in order to be complete. No, the definition of a God is that the God is complete in and of itself. It's the source of its own existence. But God does this. Why? Because it's good. It's a good thing to do. God makes a decision, an act of his intellect and his will working together to do something that is a good. If the creation of the universe is a good, then good is a moral quality. Something that's good or tends towards the benefit of the human person or the benefit of all things, even all created things, that makes the universe a moral universe. So we're already dealing with morality even from the first seconds, or it's like a millionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second that it took for the universe to erupt in the Big Bang. Just because of the fact that the nature of the action was good, it makes it a moral universe. So the universe is where human beings were created, and the universe is where human beings were destined for God. It's the place where human beings enter into relationship with God. And so the eternal law is the source of all law and order, and hence it applies to all creatures. Okay, so there are physical laws in the universe that the universe just seems to abide by, and no one seems to know where they come from or doesn't want to ask the question. But there are these physical laws, but there are also laws governing our physical relationships, which we call actions, and how we treat each other and treat other people. And this is also part of the eternal law. It is a supreme law because it comes from God. God has imposed this order on the universe. This is how it should act. And if you violate those laws, there are opposite reactions, which are apparently not good ones. you don't cease to be a human being, or God doesn't annihilate you the moment you make a bad decision. Oh, you violated my law of the universe. Poof, you're gone. You're out. I take you out of the game. No, you still exist, but there are opposite reactions to that choice that you've made that are the opposite of good, which are we call evil. The divine law, this is short, so I'll end with this. Whoops, hold on a second here. This is short. The divine law is the name for God's laws that are made known to humanity through revelation. I know I'm going out of order here because I want to finish with natural law. I'll go on to positive law and then natural law after that. But divine law is very simple. It's basically another title for revelation. These are laws that God makes known to human reason, to humanity through his own specific action, his own intervention into history. God cares about us, and God wants us to know certain things that make for a flourishing human life and certain things that don't. So essentially, these are God's specific and explicit statements of his will about the practice of the eternal law. So, for example, the Ten Commandments, the basis of the natural law would be the Ten Commandments, 10 things to do and not do. But also we have the greatest commandment that we talked about, the commandment of love of God and love of neighbor. Okay. And then Jesus also, in his role as the Son of God, gives specific commands for how his followers should act. These are not for nothing. I mean, you might say, well, why does God give all these specific things? They're not for nothing. They're supposed to be helping people towards their good. And some of these commands are time stamped. Some of the commands that you read in the Bible were specifically for the circumstances at the time they were given, and maybe don't apply anymore because the situation has changed. But they're still what we call divine laws because they're God's revelation. Okay, so that's enough of that. I will continue on next week, and it's good to see you all. Have a good weekend. God bless you. Okay. Make sure it's not here. Yes, Ojeda is not here.